Anybody can build a machine learning model these days, and sometimes you can just have a computer do it for you. Auto ML is a growing thing as well, but the hardest part is, especially with today's increasingly complicated political landscape and legal landscape, just trying to figure out if your organization is compliant has become a major challenge.
Welcome, everyone, to the AI Governance Podcast, where we discuss practical approaches for responsible AI practitioners. My name is Shankar, and today we'll be discussing the rapidly evolving landscape of AI ethics organizations. We're excited to welcome to the podcast today Abhinav Raghunathan, who is the founder of the Ethical AI Database, which promotes transparency and conducts market research in the ethical AI space. So Abhinav, welcome.
Thanks, Var. Happy to be here.
Great. So we've seen another major release from OpenAI this month. So it's a good time to take stock of how organizations have successfully deployed generative AI into their workflows. So which use cases have we seen success in, and where are the largest risks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything I say now could easily change in the span of 6 months. So it's important to preface this with that fact. But it's been a really interesting time, right? Since ChatGPT came out and generative AI has been commercialized so heavily. But one of the really interesting things that I found is that if you look from, say, October of last year to February of this year, the amount of discontent around generative AI in almost every use case across the board has increased substantially. So there's one school of thought that is, okay, the hype has died down and now everybody's purely focused on what is the value that generative AI is providing. There's another school of thought that says generative AI is honestly not as value providing as promised. And so there are a lot of use cases, right? And I'm talking from everything from marketing and content generation to knowledge management and things like that. The use cases that have seen the best outcomes are the ones that have very, I guess, there are very expected outputs that you can try and tie value to. And what I mean by that is, take call centers, right? Call centers are a big operation for a lot of enterprises, and it's one of the use cases where we've seen a lot of success out of generative AI. Why? Because it's very clear what the goal is from call center volume and summarizing transcripts and finding entities in that transcript and looking at all of those different things. It's a very clear and predictable outcome. And so those have seen success. There are others where, if I want to generate marketing content, those have generally been successful as well. Things that typically embrace a very controlled or confined scope are the ones that do the best. Now, if we go and look at, all these RAG assistants and all of these other technologies that come out, enterprises are a lot less excited about the value that's been shown so far, primarily because generative AI is so difficult to control. And a lot of the creativity that we love in humans, it becomes very dangerous in generative AI. So that's one part of it, right? And there's tons of other facets to that as well. But if we talk about risks, like I mentioned just 5 seconds ago, creativity breeds a lot of risk. And so if we put generative AI in very high stakes solutions, we get a lot of potential for mismanagement. Humans tend to overtrust things that they've seen works 90% effectively, and then they start relying on it more and more, and that can breed errors down the road. So there's a lot of different areas where risk can creep in. And if you think about, okay, how do I apply generative AI to something like healthcare or consumer lending that is extremely risky and very high stakes, I'm not so optimistic about the potential as it stands right now for these generative AI agents and all of this other technology to stand up to that requirement of being so these stringent requirements of being so trustworthy and transparent and all of that good stuff. So yeah, I mean, lots more work to be done for sure.
Great. So yeah, we're definitely in a place where organizations are kind of taking stock of the early lessons of, like, as you mentioned, the hype has died down a little bit, or potentially died down a little bit, and organizations are taking a more kind of sober view. And as you suggested, it's hard to predict the future. Um, but let's still try. So, what do you expect the relevance of generative AI to be for organizations in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this is one of the technologies in recent times that carries the most potential. It's just that the amount of effort it takes to make that potential realized is very high. So, I mean, if you look at it right now, every enterprise is trying to experiment with generative AI. Everybody's trying to prove that value. And while all that's going on, there are, you know, 200 companies coming out of the blue that are all focused specifically on how do we make sure that this system is as transparent, as trustworthy, and as reasonably safe as it can be. So I think about all of the various GRC solutions that exist, all of the model testing, model eval, model benchmarking. There's a whole ecosystem of companies that focus on just that. So I don't think it's that risky to say that generative AI will become a much more potent part of an enterprise's workflow. I just think that there's a significant amount of time and work that has to be done prior to that. I think it's going to take some real consolidation from the market too, because if you just do a quick Google on model evaluation software, you'll get like 15, 20 that come back just in the first page. So there's a lot of products out there and a lot of vendors that are offering that, but it's going to take some real vetting from organizations and enterprises and to try and garner that trust from the end users.
Great. Now, switching gears a bit to what is now called classical AI.
Mm,
Organizations are, now because of the AI Act in the EU and other similar legal requirements around the world, organizations are putting in place programs that compliance programs at the data model and AI system levels. Often we see that they build on privacy programs. What is your view of where organizations are struggling the most to build enterprise grade, scalable, classical AI solutions?
yeah, absolutely. It pains me to hear machine learning being called as classical AI, but that's a sign of the times. Yeah. So I mean, building machine learning and classical AI applications, I think, is actually become the least challenging part of the problem, right? I think the harder part is if I want visibility across my enterprise on which models are using what data sources, which models are exposed to which consumer base, which models are, operating at a higher severity level. That's the difficult part, right? It's really the governance and the compliance aspect of it, especially at large enterprises, that becomes so hard. Anybody can build a machine learning model these days, and sometimes you can just have a computer do it for you. Auto ML is a growing thing as well, but the hardest part is, especially with today's increasingly complicated political landscape and legal landscape, just trying to figure out if your organization is compliant has become a major challenge. Combine that with how now every week or two we hear about new potential proposed legislation from different countries, from different departments, even here within the U.S. There's almost no good way of for legal teams, risk teams, or artificial intelligence professionals within an industry to keep up with that work that's required. So, it's all about protecting a company's assets. And by assets, I mean the models themselves, the workflows themselves. How do we make sure that they are as compliant as they can be on as automated of a basis as they can be as well, right?
Great. Um, as organizations kind of build these programs, uh, what are we seeing as the emerging themes in terms of who's running them? So who governs them at the C level, at the product level? Are there kind of common patterns emerging? And what role does upskilling and responsible AI play in building out these programs?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a challenging one to answer as well. I mean, all of the companies that I've come across while running the ethical AI database, right? It kind of depends on who they really market to. And the buyers of a lot of these responsible AI enabling tools come from all over the enterprise, right? So if we look at the C-suite, every AI security solution that's out there is marketing directly to the CISO, right? Because it's an existing role. It's not too far-fetched to say that they should also be covering AI security. So that one's easy. But if you look at GRC, right, who is really responsible for a company's AI assets, right? And you could say, yeah, it's a CIO, it might be the CDAO. There's even a push to create a new role called the CAIO, right? The Chief AI Officer. But a lot of times, right, the buyers of these products are actually the legal teams. They're the risk teams. They're the developers themselves might shell out for a product that boosts visibility across an entire organization. So it's a complicated landscape with a lot of buyers located throughout an enterprise, with a lot of solutions that are marketing directly to buyers of all different levels across an enterprise as well. And so, yeah, there's the C-suite that makes some of these more executive decisions and might be making the decisions for GRC as a whole. But the people who are enforcing those policies, right, the developers, the product people, might make their own decisions as to which products will help them enforce on their own, on the technical side. What helps them enforce a company's internal policy or external legal policy. So really it kind of feels like every one of these buy decisions should involve stakeholders from all over the industry, the enterprise. So it's not clear cut, which I think is a really interesting problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about in terms of kind of upskilling and having all of these organizations rowing in the same direction? What are kind of some of the common patterns that we're seeing at organizations?
Yeah, and that's an even more difficult thing, right? I think 80% of generative AI is literally just educating people on what generative AI actually is. And so we've seen a lot of creations of sort of centralized upskilling and management forces, always similarly called the AI Center of Excellence, or AI Command Center. There's a ton of different names, but typically what an enterprise does is create a centralized group of people that can A, keep up with the technology, and B, disseminate information and educate around this technology to the rest of the enterprise. So that group is a really pivotal one, and it's something that I've seen grow in many enterprises over time. It's actually being recommended by a lot of consulting firms as well, just trying to, they're recommending this to their clients to say, look, like this is a very, very fast-paced industry, and nobody really knows what's going on. It's important to establish a center of command, a center of authority to make sure everybody's upskilled, up to date, and that the C-suite has full visibility of what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, and might add to that, it varies by industry as well. So, for example, some of the financial services organizations tend to already have well-developed governance for digital programs that they can tweak for AI, as well as centers of excellence or communities of practice that they can similarly refashion. Whereas some other industries or segments of industries are closer to developing governance and upskilling for AI from scratch. So we're also seeing kind of different strategies depending on how the industries have approached digital in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so company dependent, so sector dependent that it's really just I don't even know that things will start to converge over time, right? Because each of these are AI is such a use case specific thing, especially if you look at generative AI. So, it's a question of whether or not it will converge. And, my take is that I don't think it will. I think it'll stay completely separate.
Great. Well, it's the ethical AI database is such an exciting and comprehensive resource for all of us in the responsible AI space. We saw that you put out your report on the first half of 2024, looking at the responsible AI ecosystem. And that's very important work because as we were just saying, it's important to have visibility on some of these otherwise opaque areas of responsible and ethical AI and how the field is developing. So, firstly, thank you so much for developing and maintaining that resource and all the work that you do. I would encourage all of our listeners to take a look at that report on the first half of 2024 and to explore the database. Um, so, can you speak a little bit about why you founded the Ethical AI Database?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the kind words. The reports and all of the resources are on the website. It's just eaidb.org, so feel free to check that out. Yeah, I mean, I established the database in 2022 because I noticed there was a sort of paradigm shift a little bit from, okay, how do we build and scale AI? And, I mean this in the traditional sense because this was around the same time that ChatGPT came out. So, machine learning is where it all came from. It was a shift from how do we build and scale machine learning to, okay, how do we hedge on some of these downsides that are so common with machine learning algorithms? So I mean things like algorithmic bias, I mean things like compliance, data privacy, all of that stuff. Um, I wanted to create a distinction between the companies that were providing that accelerator, right? The gas pedal. Let's scale machine learning within an enterprise. So comparing those companies with the ones that were offering to be the brakes instead. So the ones that were uh, trying to limit the downsides, provide a more responsible implementation of these technologies. And I felt like that latter part was a very underfunded, under-researched area. And the analogy I like to use, I just use gas pedal and brake. I mean, you can't drive a car at 100 miles per hour unless you know you have good brakes, right? So it's the same premise. But I started the database tracking around 100 companies that were offering responsible AI enablement solutions. And since then, the number has grown to, I think we're at 290 or something right now. So there's been a lot of growth just in 2 years, spurred on by a lot of misuses around generative AI, deep fakes, and all of that scary stuff as well. But yeah, so the original purpose stays true. It's meant to be a public resource to bring awareness to the companies that are actively trying to create more responsible implementations of AI, both classical and generative, in our society today.
So, as I was reviewing, the report, it struck me that there seems to be a lot of demand for AI, ethical AI in the ethical AI space. A lot of the solutions are security focused, which I guess should not be surprising. But for those of us who take kind of a really broad societal view of responsible AI, security is one piece of several things we need to get right in ethical AI. So, why do you think? What do you think is driving the demand for AI security solutions, and why is that such a growing segment?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the reason I think security is in the, in everybody's focus right now is because it's one of the easiest pillars in responsible AI to really understand and monetize on. And the reason I say that is because if you look at something like GRC, there's a very, the amount of value you actually get from good governance, good risk control, it's not a very well defined number, right? It's hard to say that we've made this much revenue because we've hedged downside risk. There's another part of that, which is cybersecurity as a space has already proved the value, right? They've already done that. And as such, there are already positions at enterprises like a CISO, like a risk department, cyber department, that are already looking at cybersecurity. And the extension of that to AI cybersecurity is not as heavy as it might be for something like GRC, where you might have to train your entire legal team on how to use how to look at AI governance specifically. So that's part of the reason. And I think the other parts are just that, you know, if there's at any point in time you deploy any of your resources to the public eye, you already run a risk of things like adversarial attacks and all of this bad stuff. And whether or not you have GRC solutions, you need that security, right? So whether or not you're focusing on the governance aspect, if your product ends up going to market at some point, you're going to need that security piece. So for investors and people that are paying attention to these companies, it's a very clear demonstration of the business proposition, right? Whereas for GRC solutions, for some of these other facets of the responsible AI pillars, the inherent value is less demonstrable, right? It's less tangible. And a lot of the AI security companies are just riding on the back of a lot of these traditional cybersecurity companies that have done the hard work of laying the, paving the path for budgets to be assigned to cybersec and protection in that regard. So we actually just saw, so Palo Alto, one of the biggest players in cybersecurity, released their first generative AI product I think it was a couple months ago, And that was a big deal, right? Because that was further validation that AI security is going to be one of the biggest focuses going forward for a lot of these enterprises. We also saw Cisco, right? Cisco acquiring robust intelligence was a big move as well. So there's been a lot of movement in that space, more so than any of the other pillars. And here those are some of the reasons why.
Appreciate that insight. And so now, to zoom out a bit, um, do you feel that companies and civil society are working well together to manage AI risks? And beyond the ethical AI database, what kinds of other organizations and initiatives would you like to see people start in this space?
Yeah, it's tricky to say, right? Because there is a lot of dimensions to how enterprises, how governments even should be approaching responsible AI. And so there are some great initiatives out there already, right? And I think the whole NIST framework that came out recently has been a big deal for a lot of people looking for guidance on how to, implement responsible AI principles at an enterprise. So I think there's been a lot of work done on frameworks and best practices and stuff like that. But I think what we're missing is, in order to really increase the demand of these practices and enforce them, we still need some kind of legal framework that's going to hold these enterprises accountable for their AI assets. And so that is still yet to be seen, right? Even machine learning, there have been a couple of discriminatory hiring acts and policies there, but there still is some work to be done in terms of generative AI, even traditional AI. A lot of the bias and discrimination has been sector specific, right? So there are laws on fair insurance, fair lending, stuff like that. But I think we need a more general, holistic framework, right? I think we as a country, as any country, should be looking at this as a holistic way to govern and regulate what enterprises do and hold them accountable. So the EU AI Act was a great step in that direction, right? And there's been a lot of positive and negative thoughts, I think, about that act. But I think it's a good step, but there's still more to be done.
Great. And we'll have to leave it there today. So Abhinav, thank you again for your work on the ethical AI database and for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
And thanks also to all of our listeners. We're looking forward to seeing you next time. And thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.